most recent work has been with high school and post-secondary education folks. So people who have graduated, who are employed, or who are in college settings. Today we're going to talk about autism then and now. Back when I first started in the field, there were not very many people who knew what autism was, and now it's on almost every TV show. We're going to talk a little bit about autistic traits, and I say autistic traits, but when I present, I will say people with autism, because I do use first-person first language whenever I can. Gifts, strengths and interests, what employees can do, working with individuals with differences, whether it's sensory or social skills or what have you. I'm sorry, what employees can do, and then what employers can do. And some things to consider as you go forward today. And then we'll finish up with any questions. So back in 1988, I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Rain Man. And Tom Cruise took Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman, out of the institution and showed him gambling and life of ladies and drinking and a whole host of things, how to drive a car and so forth. But in this movie, he had some rigid tendencies about Wapner time and Kmart and things like that. But at the end of the movie, he ended up going back into the institution. And that was, the prevalence rate was about 1 in 5,088. And throughout time, we have gotten much better with diagnosing. We have better instruments, better identification tools, and better interventions. And so now, you know, it's 2017, almost 2018, and just the other day I watched 3 shows, all with lead characters with autism. Young Sheldon, which is Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper's younger self growing up, then Big Bang Theory, and then The Good Doctor. As you can see, this is a very widely popularized diagnosis right now, and so the awareness is very, very good, and I'm sure that many of you are either family members of someone with autism, have a neighbor with autism, or have a friend with autism, or have some sort of connection to autism. But what we now know is that folks are staying in their community more and are able to be employed and go to college and be successful. So long are the days where you have to drop someone off at an institution. This is a little bit about statistics here. The prevalence, the last reported prevalence rate was in 2010, and that was 1 in 68. More recent figures are looking at 1 in 45, but that has not been confirmed yet. So what's changed? Back in 1975, this is Bill Gates' senior picture in high school, or thereabouts. He was probably considered as maybe an introvert, shy, quirky, not very social, but super smart. Maybe gifted or brainiac, geek, whatever you would call him. Well, now, Bill Gates is a very wealthy, successful man. Autism, sure, but does it mean that he is less? Absolutely not. He is one of the most brilliant men today and has changed big aspects of the world. So it's nice to see the positive side to autism. So when we think about autism, you know, this is a neat little picture. Expect blunt, honest answers. If you don't want the truth, don't ask. This is very much the case. Since I've been working in the field, I've done very very specific training in the moment when someone with autism would say things like, "What's that on your face?" And it could be, you know, a blemish, or "Are you pregnant?" "No, I put on a couple pounds." Or That's an ugly shirt. Well, it's my favorite shirt. So some of those things are blunt and can come off as pretty rude, but it's you know, that it's nothing nothing terrible. It can be shaped. You can learn to blow it off, and you can tell the person, you know, that hurt my feelings. Not the best at water cooler conversations. You know, on Monday after football all day over the weekend, you might talk about the scores. You might talk about what you did over the weekend, and people with autism may or may not be interested in that. Probably not interested unless it's about the scores. Very blunt. They may come across as arrogant or rigid. If you think about Sheldon Cooper, when he speaks to his friends, who are his close friends, and even his fiance at this point, he comes across as pretty arrogant and sort of a jerk because he knows everything and is not afraid to tell you. And that's not, he's not trying to be that way. It's just sort of stating of the facts. People may come across as complaining, not really liking things that are being said to them or about them, or the way transitions are happening or things are changing. It's not necessarily complaining. It's just, again, stating of the facts. Sometimes there's some social blunders. You know, it's those rules at the office about sexual harassment or about saying things inappropriate. Sometimes maybe a little bit more challenging for folks who have difficulty understanding some of the social nuances of language and interactions. Nonverbal communication, these are things like body language, posture, eye contact. Unless it's specifically taught, sometimes it's completely missed. So you may look at a person and your eyes may be furrowed, your brows furrowed, and your arms crossed. Well, you would say, oh, that person is angry. And that would not cross the mind of someone with autism. They don't really pick up on those cues. Expressions may be muddled, so they may come across as very angry, but in fact, they're not. One young man that I work with, he will say everything with a tone of voice that you would think that he's irate, but he's not at all. And you'll say, "Are you angry?" And he will be the first to say, "No, why would you say that?" So very much kind of his words and his actions don't necessarily match his tone of voice. And then perspective taking. This is difficult, especially in the workforce. You know, people have a variety of different opinions and perspectives of things, and you have to learn to navigate that and listen and accept other people's perspectives and value their opinions. And this might be challenging for people on the spectrum. And like I said, face and words don't always match. There's some sensory stuff that always gets in the way as well. These are some of the things that have now, over the past 5 to 10 years, we're beginning to see that there's very big consistencies in an autism diagnosis and some sensory issues that may arise. And some of those things might be loud noises, repetitive noises, bright lights, bad cologne, the fluorescent lights in buildings can be very disturbing. They make a humming noise. If you are very, very quiet, you can hear it. And just the color they give off is pretty annoying, I think, as well. I worked with a young lady who told her coworker to stop chewing gum like a cow because she could hear her snapping it and chewing it. Well, that wasn't taken very nicely. So it's a matter of identifying, well, these things really are annoying. And, you know, I have sensory issues myself, and people who crunch really loud or click their pen really bugs me. But either I can choose to ignore it, put on headphones, listen to music myself, or get in trouble and telling them stop doing those things. So it's a matter of if those things bother you, to take it upon yourself to figure out appropriate ways to deal with them. There's plenty of gifts. Of course, I start with the negative, which isn't probably the best idea, but there are plenty of gifts. Focus. People on the autism spectrum, when they are interested or find their niche, are extremely focused, very detail-oriented, and probably the best workers around. They take pride in their work. There's a very big desire to please, so they will work tirelessly to fulfill a project deadline or work late hours to make sure that everything gets done appropriately. Very independent. Once they know the routine, the schedule, the expectations, you can let them go, and they're not going to be the ones who are going to be asking you tons of questions, which could be a problem if they don't necessarily understand, but if they understand all the expectations, then they're going to be completely independent. Big attention to detail. If you want someone who will be extremely diligent about making sure everything is correct on forms or in data or formulas, this is the person. Very honest. So I mentioned that they will say things like, "What's that on your face?" meaning that there's some sort of blemish. Well, it's honesty too. So if you want their opinion, they will give it to you. It's sort of, you see what you get what you see, and it'll be straightforward. Very much logic over emotion. So where, there's lots of psychological tests where you can identify if you're an introvert, extrovert. The MMPI does logic, emotion, feelings, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're very much logical. So almost to a fault, where other people may have a very logical sense about them, they will also take into account other people's emotions or feelings or how they would be affected. Not necessarily for folks on the autism spectrum. One of my favorite things about working with people with autism is they have a very unique perspective that most people wouldn't necessarily ever think about, and it wouldn't come to their mind. So if you stop and listen to some of their thoughts and beliefs and opinions about things, you will end up with a wealth of information. Not really great at generalization of skills. So if they're able to do something in one setting, it's pretty high level, consistent. It might be a little bit more challenging to generalize. Very visual, three-dimensional thinking. So some of the great jobs for people on the spectrum are engineering, physics, chemistry, data entry, computer programming, those sorts of things. Natural strengths and interests, tons of strengths. This is one of my favorite little cartoons here, but they're not necessarily things that they will be going to be telling you, like, these are my strengths. You have to work with them. Keep an eye out for them. And if you find the strengths, using them to leverage quality work is a great strategy. So employees, on the autism spectrum, I work with many, many employees, and a lot of the challenges are around disclosure. And often people who have autism, who have less support needs, don't often like to disclose that they have an autism diagnosis. And I leave it completely up to the person. The benefits of disclosing is that if you say, hey, I have an autism spectrum disorder, and here are my strengths, here are things that are very big challenges for me. And if you put that straightforward, straight up in the beginning, then the employer will know, oh, if these are challenges, I will know that I need to put things in writing or make a schedule or have clear deadlines. If you don't disclose, an employer will often misinterpret a lot of behavior or nuances as being rude or disrespectful or what have you. So I'm a proponent of disclosing. Use your areas of strength. You know, oftentimes people look for jobs in something that they think might be fun or that someone else tells them they would be good at. Absolutely not. We all do something that we like, and that's a strength for us. I certainly wouldn't be good working in a restaurant because I think it's too chaotic. I don't want to be around that much food. I don't want to deal with someone who doesn't like their food and I have to take it back. So I know that wouldn't be an area of strength for me. Other people think that's great and really like engaging with the patrons. So it's important, just like everybody else, to use the area of strength. Request accommodations. Do not demand them. I worked with a young man who insisted that he have his own office with noise canceling panels put in and dim lighting. That's not okay. You can request accommodations, but it's also up to you as a person to identify some of the things that you could do on your own. So I know that when my office is busy, I close my door and put on headphones and listen to music. That way I don't hear the conversations that are going on in the hall. I don't like fluorescent lights either, so I turn them off and bring in my own lamp. These are accommodations that I can make for myself, and I don't have to demand that my employer do them for me. Refrain from being a know-it-all. Nobody likes a know-it-all. Sheldon Cooper on Big Bang Theory, if you haven't seen it, I recommend YouTubing it or catching a repeat episode or what have you. But he comes across very much as a know-it-all for everything, and it gets tiring. So refraining from that, if you know something, absolutely tell it, but you don't have to continue to tell, to badger people, to talk about it all the time, or to let people know that they're stupid because they don't know what you know. Practice. You have to practice tact, empathy, humor, humility, and those nonverbal exchanges. It's not easy to do something that doesn't come naturally to you. So everyone has to practice something that's difficult for them. So I have to practice dealing with people who are disrespectful in the workplace. So in the past, when I was younger, I may have said, blown them off and never talked to them again. But now, through practice, I could tactfully say, you know, what you said was hurtful, and you need to do X, Y, and Z. So practicing those things is something that can be helpful in the future. When in doubt, leave it out. So if you have something to say that adds to the conversation, great. But if you don't know if it's going to add to the conversation, then don't say it. So there's an acronym, THINK. So I think it's THINK. Tell it if it's not going to be hurtful. Is it something that adds to the conversation? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it accurate? So those are the things that you can say. If it's not accurate, if it's not going to add to the conversation, if it's not necessary to the conversation, then don't say it. And then developing some coping strategies. Work is difficult. Not everybody likes their job every day. At least I don't think so. So developing coping strategies so that you can get through those difficult days and difficult conversations or interactions is important. When we have a stressful time at work, sometimes we go get a cup of coffee, go get a drink of water, take a walk take the stairs, have lunch. Those are coping strategies. You can develop the same sort of coping strategies that are useful for you. And then reflect on whatever happened. So if there is a social faux pas, or if there's something that, an interesting interaction or something, take time to think about what happened. Did it go well? Did it not go well? What can you do in the future to make sure that it doesn't happen again if it was something inappropriate, and make sure that you rectify the situation. So if you did hurt someone's feelings, you say something. So there's this fight or flight response, and social situations are very much that for people with social difficulties, like those folks with autism. So social aspects of the workplace that are really difficult are those small talk types of opportunities. So the definition of small talk is polite conversation about unimportant and uncontroversial matters. So unimportant. Well, if it's not important, then why would we talk about it? Is what most people on the spectrum would say. So why would I have to talk about the weather or sports or the holiday that's coming up? It's not important to me, so why would it be important to anyone else? Well, it's kind of a social way of, a safe way of engaging socially. And so some of these small talk conversations are challenging. So if you know someone with autism and know something that they like to talk about, maybe bringing that topic up would be a nice way to start these small conversations. But what do you need to do? The empathy, again, understanding how others feel and why they feel that way. Why is someone angry at you? Well, did you say something inappropriate? Did you not meet your deadline? Why are they feeling that way? Because you have autism does not give you a pass on cooperating, either as part of a team or as a member of a team to complete a project. You have to cooperate. Even if it's not grouped together cooperation like a team, but you have your part of a job to do, you have to cooperate. Verbal communication is important, both in tone of voice and email, even though it's not necessarily verbal. Email is very, can be misconstrued. So making sure that you reread email and that it's appropriate and that your tone of voice is appropriate and the tone of the email is appropriate before you press send is a good idea for everybody, really. Listening, express that you've listened to someone. Folks with autism might not give you the best eye contact, so you might not think that they're listening to you. So if you have autism and you are talking with someone and they say something to you, repeat it back to them. Oh, okay, so what you want me to do is get that report to you by next Friday. Got it. Just that recasting back to someone makes them understand that you were in fact listening. And then practicing that nonverbal communication, both in understanding other people and then engaging in nonverbal communication yourself. You can watch videos and movies and pause it and think about, gee, I wonder what that body language means. Or see how someone responds to someone based on their body language and facial expressions. Okay, employers, what can we do? Find out what your employees' interests are. Start there. Those are great conversation starters. Those are ways to build motivation. Make sure there's structure, routine, there's deadlines, there's things in writing. Set clear expectations about those things. Do not mandate social skills. Have you ever been in a workplace where, you know, everyone does happy hour and you get teased if you don't go out with them? Or there's a Christmas party and everyone's invited and everyone's going and you don't really want to. Don't make it a big thing. If there's accommodations that would be helpful for a person, do your best to do that, to help them help themselves. Don't get offended. I used to get offended all the time when people would say things that were inappropriate, like, oh, are you pregnant? Or that's an ugly shirt. I don't get offended anymore. I use it as an opportunity to say, hey, no, I'm not pregnant. And that's kind of something you shouldn't say to someone. So don't get offended, just use it as an opportunity to explain. You can support someone without scrutinizing them. So supporting without being hovering and nitpicky about things. Checking in either through email or a specific time that you're going to meet each week to make sure that everything is going smoothly. Address concerns effectively. And I'm going to go back to that in writing. Things in writing are very, very helpful. Sometimes it's very difficult to listen when you're upset. And so if you have a conversation with someone who is clearly upset about something, if you put it in writing as well, they can go back and reflect and reread and reread and reread until they understand. And then model acceptance, not just tolerance. You know, we moved from, you know, the 1 in 5,000 to the 1 in 150, and it was tolerance, and people would be included in things and tolerated. And it's not about tolerance, it's about acceptance. And it's more about neurodiversity. We are all very different. And many of the things I said today, I'm sure 80% of you would say, oh gosh, those things would work for me too. Absolutely. These are not things that are, you know, magic wand, hocus pocus stuff. It's effective ways of interacting with people appropriately based on individual differences. Make sure you praise people. Praise goes a long way. Think about how you feel when you get praised. If you went to work every day and never received any reinforcement, you would start probably slacking off on your job, waking up feeling like, oh, gee, I think I might have a sore throat again today. But if you every once in a while were told, hey, that's an awesome job, great work, I love how you're doing that, or thanks for getting that to me on time or before time or what have you, or great idea, you'll be much more interested in working hard. And it'll make you love the work that you do. Something that when we think about getting people a little bit more comfortable with interacting, you know, the small talk is difficult, but if there's structure around it, like stand-ups or morning huddles or morning meeting or what have you, where something happens every day at the same time and the expectations are the same, where you can get folks who are a little bit more shy or quiet, whether they have autism or not, to interact. And so if there's this kind of a framework for doing so, and there's support if needed, so maybe the framework is posted, they can be successful. So, you know, if you have to have morning meeting and you talk about, everyone goes around and says what their goal for the day is, and they know every day they're going to have to say what the goal for the day is, then they're going to be more comfortable after a while doing so. What do you do about that quiet person? Give them prep time. So if you went into work tomorrow and said, hey, everybody, we're going to have this morning meeting and everyone's going to talk about what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and what their next deadline is. Well, heck, that's going to be challenging for a lot of people. And people who don't want to talk in front of other people, that's going to go back to that fight or flight response and cause anxiety and panic. So you don't want to do that. So make sure you, if you were going to do something like that, send an email out now and then do that in a week or two. Don't assume that silence is a disagreement or consent. So if someone's quiet, it's not like they're saying, oh yeah, that's a great idea, or it's not them saying, I have nothing to add to this because I don't think it's right. So you can't assume anything. So the best way to deal with silence is to follow up with that person one-on-one rather than in that small group. Sometimes we think, gosh, that person's really quiet. But when we realize we're doing all the talking, and if someone's doing all the talking, it's very hard for someone else to speak up. I'm in meetings often where, someone after the meeting will say, gee, you're really quiet in that meeting. And usually I'm not a quiet person. I'll say, well, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. And that's, so then, yeah, I did seem pretty quiet. If you still don't get any feedback or anyone interacting, ask questions. After you give them that time to think about what you were saying, ask them a question, because questions require a response. Well, on the flip side, there's that monologue talker, or the person who just likes to talk to hear themselves talk. That's someone who might talk about their special interests. They might just monopolize a meeting, talking about their project. Giving them deadlines and giving them time limits is important too. Having them talk for a couple minutes and say, okay, we're going to give someone else a chance to add their feedback is a nice way of stopping that person. You can also give them a visual cue. So maybe you work something out with employees that if you tap your watch or if you pass a certain colored Post-it note to them, that means you need to be quiet and let other people talk. So on your own time, think about likes, your dislikes, some positive thoughts, negative thoughts, and what your motivations are. And this is for everybody. So we all have dislikes. This doesn't necessarily pertain to me because I like talking about sports, but when people talk to me about whatever, I don't like that. So what you might think of changing your frame of thought, and this is based on cognitive behavior therapy. Maybe you might say, I know that person always likes to talk to me about sports, but instead I'm going to start talking first. I'm going to talk to him about a movie I saw over the weekend. That way I know he's not going to talk to me about sports. So this would work both for a person who has autism or someone who's interacting with someone with autism. A negative thought might be, that guy across from me sure is stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing. Well, that's obviously inappropriate. So you might want to say something like reframe your thinking. That guy across from me doesn't seem to know as much as I do, but I'm sure he's good at, or he seems to need some help. Maybe I'll ask him if he needs help. So again, so you're not presuming incompetence. Learning from experiences is really important. And this is that reflecting that I talked about earlier. So, I told the receptionist that she needed to stop chewing gum like a cow. She told me to go to hell and then told my boss, and my boss spoke to me about it. So how can I fix that situation? And this is obviously that example I was telling you. Sorry, Kim, I didn't mean to be so blunt. I'm just on the edge trying to get this project done. So figuring out how to fix a situation so that there aren't any hard feelings and that you're not perceived as a difficult person to work with is important. If you don't know something, ask. There's this hidden curriculum, and there are several books out there teaching people the hidden curriculum, things that we take for granted, so that you're quiet in a library, or at least you're supposed to be quiet in a library. You don't laugh at a funeral. You shake a person's hand when you meet them for the first time. You don't hug strangers. There's a variety of things that are things that we kind of learn just by being who we are. And if you don't know something, or if you haven't learned that, you can ask other people. So asking someone, gosh, I'm invited to this housewarming party, and am I supposed to bring a gift? And that's very appropriate. the hidden curriculum rule would be, well, bring a card, maybe bring something for the house. So asking is by far a better way than just assuming. Here's one. Some women sometimes go to the bathroom together, men don't. So if you're out to dinner and women get up and go to the bathroom together, you don't say, hey, what are you doing? Or you also don't go when another man goes to the bathroom. You don't talk about someone's weight or their age or their physical differences. You certainly don't ask a woman if she's pregnant. You don't sit next to someone at a movie theater if there's empty seats. You don't crawl over people to get to a seat. You say, excuse me. There's a variety of things that we take for granted and we just learn to do that are things that people with autism or social differences might need help with. Any questions?
Staci, are we audible from here?
So there's a question here. How important is it to praise somebody who is just doing what they are paid to do? Well, we all are paid to do our job. But again, sometimes it's nice to hear, hey, I appreciate you, or thanks for doing that quickly, or just something. It's good to hear that you're doing something right, whether it's your job or not. If you have children and they do well in school, well, they're supposed to do well in school. But if you tell them that you're really proud of them for doing well in school and for studying hard for that test, they're going to do that more often. So it is pretty important. Another question. People complain that meetings are long. How do you get everyone involved to running an efficient meeting? That's difficult because sometimes when you try to get everyone involved, then the meetings do go too long. So before a meeting, perhaps you let a few people know that you're going to ask them for their feedback in that meeting about whatever the topic is. So then you set that expectation when the meeting starts that I've asked these 4 people to give their feedback about the meeting today. So if you have further questions or if you have something to add, please see me after or email me. Resources on this subject. Well, if you are interested in autism specifically, if you go to www.vcuautismcenter.org, which is on that screen, there are tons of free website webinars, courses, fact sheets, how-to videos, Ask the Expert. There's a couple podcasts. So that's specifically to autism. If you want to know more information about adults with autism, you can email me, certainly, anytime. And I can either set up a meeting with you, we could have a phone conversation, or I can send you materials. What other questions?
Staci, this is Norval. Can you hear me? Hello?
There's a great resource. It's called Asperger's on the Job. Must-have advice for people with Asperger's or high-functioning autism and their employers, educators, and advocates. by Rudy Simone, Simone. That's a great, small, quick, easy read that might be useful for people who are both on the spectrum or who work with people on the spectrum. It has great perspectives. And the foreword is by Temple Grandin, who is a very successful adult with autism.
Hello? Hey folks, this is Norval here. I don't know exactly what was going on here earlier, but for whatever reason, Staci was unable to hear us from here in Stanton. So we've been
Does anyone else
online.
have any other questions?
Hello? Hello, Staci.
Well, thank you so much for your time today on your lunch break, and happy Wednesday. Hope you all enjoy your day and the rest of the week.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we weren't able to hear Staci. We appreciate Staci's time in giving this talk today. Apologies for not being able to communicate directly with her. When we tested our connection here before 12, things were working fine, so not exactly sure what went on. Anyway, we will be looking for folks hopefully next Tuesday for Bob Doring's talk about capability indices. Until then, we'd like to wish everybody a good rest of the day, and thanks for tuning in. We'll talk again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye now.